What's up, everybody? It's waba, and I had the chance to have a nice little discussion with Nick from Grinding Gear Games this past week, and this video is actually just going to be that. It's technically not going to even be a video. It's just made to be on in the background, so you guys don't have to worry about watching it. You're not going to see any goofy facial expressions or anything like that. I'm not going to have gameplay because it was almost an hour long, so I'm not going to get that much gameplay on there because really the meat of this is our discussion. And I thought it was pretty good. If you guys have any comments or feedback for me, let me know. If you enjoyed it, let me know. Share it. I'd appreciate if you guys do share this because I want, as many people to hear this as possible. And yeah, I'm going to be doing stuff like this more often. And also with the other thing, the last video I made, which was called Something Weekly or Something Semi-Weekly, something like that. That's going to kind of be my new standalone pseudo podcast. I really hate the word podcast. I think there should be something else for it. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Share it, and thanks for listening. I didn't realize that you were on Front Seat Gamer.
Yeah.
I just connected that. Well, that's good to know. How's it going? How are you doing today?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good. For the people who don't know, actually, to be completely honest, I'm kind of one of those people. What exactly do you do at Grinding Gear Games?
So I'm one of the game designers, and like most of the game designers at GGG, we sort of cover a lot of areas. I tend to mostly do unique items. That includes supporter uniques up until about the launch of the last patch. Now Hrishikesh, which is our newest designer, is taking those over. I also do a lot of the lore and flavor text writing. And I did the dialogue for Prophecy and the Shaper and the News Anna.
Cool.
So I do a lot of the writing as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're not just in uniques.
No.
Okay.
And we all the designers tend to do a little bit of something, right? So
Right.
I'll also have some like monster input and boss design input, league design input and stuff like. I often do early league design, so like. I'll have like a concept for a league, and then I'll sort of write down what the key points are, and then we'll start building it. And stuff invariably changes. Gotcha.
So in terms of like the Shaper uniques, because that's what this video is going to be primarily about. How involved are you with all the Shaper uniques or some Shaper uniques?
So for Atlas, I designed all of the uniques for all four Guardians and the Shaper.
Okay.
There were some tweaks and stuff done by the rest of the team. Like we all sort of discussed stuff and changed stuff.
Right.
But in terms of like concepts and most of the stats, and especially the special mods, basically across the board, I did all of those.
Which of all the uniques in Atlas that weren't supporter, which one was like the most controversial to get through all your guys' QA and everything?
Ooh, I think Eye of Innocence had a few redesigns. That's the one where you take fire damage when you ignite, and gives you some other, I think, ignite benefits. It's been a while since I actually looked at it. But initially that design had been, you get like, I think it was like 50% more ignite damage, but you can't critically strike. So the idea being you build for like a non-crit burn build, and you are losing your crit benefits from on those ignites, which and make up a huge portion of the damage.
Right.
But ultimately, like, Ignite didn't really need another crazy item.
Right.
So
now when you say it doesn't need another crazy item, are you referring to like Ember Way containing?
Yeah, well, it's just but just doesn't also need more damage.
Gotcha.
It was sort of an alternate path to the same result. And so I went with the current iteration because I thought a self-ignite build is more interesting to me. And we had Moku's Embrace, which is a support item.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with a supporter on that one years ago, and it's always been one of my favorite supporter items. Just kind of because it's quirky, but sort of thematically, it's quite flavorful.
Right.
And I've always wanted there to be a self ignite build. So this seemed like a good opportunity to add something to that pool.
So other than that unique, was there any other one that kind of like stood out for you?
There was a lot of contention around the Brain Rattler Enemies Flee mod.
Oh, okay.
people really do not like that mod. The players really don't like monsters fleeing, which I understand, but I think it gets exaggerated because when you're doing like quite a lot of damage, the flee tends to only really affect white monsters and occasionally magic monsters, and odds are pretty good that those monsters will be dead by the time that mod ever kicks in.
Right, that's exactly what I was just thinking. Like, flee almost like as a support gem, it doesn't really make too much sense because why would you use that support when you could just one-shot the mob, and then your real dangerous mobs aren't really going to be affected by flee, because obviously if that was something that wasn't balanced correctly, it would be just abusable.
Yeah. And so I knew there would be some sort of backlash to having that mod on there, but I liked it for flavor reasons. I think it is important that an item, besides the mods, that the item fit in the world thematically. Otherwise, in a game that's so focused on items, if items aren't tied to the rest of the world, it feels like it's on the wrong layer.
Right.
It feels like you're really at that point it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Like you could be killing cardboard boxes for just stat pills, and the end result is sort of harmed by there not being flavor on items. So sometimes we do mods like that just to reinforce a theme or an idea.
So with that said, I think just hearing that from you is a little surprising, because considering all the uniques that we have and the power of some of the uniques, it's you'd think that those wouldn't have been the difficult ones to get through. The what Eye of Innocence, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the first version at least was more powerful, though that one, understandably, I think it changed.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we focused the Shaper ones. We were allowed a little more wiggle room as far as power goes in the Shaper ones, because ultimately it's gated behind 4 keys. It's like it's the end boss.
There has to be a reward to it.
Yeah, and it's on a similar level to Uber series, so you have to be quite highly skilled, and you have to have played many, many, many hours. And really, if you get a big upgrade from the final piece of content, it's kind of fine, because at that point, it's not like it's letting you cheese higher powered content. You've already done the thing. So in that sense, we were allowed to get a little more power onto, for example, Starforge.
And that's actually exactly why I wanted to do this, is because I had made a video about Starforge, and when I first saw Starforge, I was like, oh wow, that's a lot of damage. But a lot of people were really quick to jump on the this is way too powerful train, and I thought that was a little just misguided, because one, as you said, it's gated behind 4 keys. It's potentially the hardest encounter in the game, supposedly. Comparable to Uber and Zeri.
Yeah, it's around the same level as Uber Series in terms of...
But then the other thing, too, is, the things that I had pointed out in my video, I'm like, well, it's on a sword. Sword skills aren't generally as good, and sure, there's life on it, and it's a high life roll, but that damage range on it is actually a pretty... I think that's something that actually really keeps it more in check, because you're going to have to invest a lot into it. You could easily get one that a rare would easily beat out.
Right. So if we're looking at the power of that item, a few things to take into account are, we need to assess weapons not just around the skills that currently exist, but changes that could happen to all those skills in the future, or new skills that could be introduced. And so while Earthquake is very powerful and very popular at the moment, and Ice Crash before that was very powerful and very popular, we need to keep in mind that we want all weapon types to feel competitive against each other, and feel like you haven't made the wrong choice by specializing in swords, for example.
Right.
And so while the power on this is pretty good, it's about, if you look at it against at Serious Disfavor, for example, it's probably around about the same damage. Once you've sort of factored in how you scale at Serious Disfavor, it comes with bleed, it's got all this other stuff. It's just the Starforge is more defensively aligned as far as the sort of secondary mods go. It's got the life. It's got area of effect, which lets you sort of stay further back. And as a cost to that, it's harder to scale that damage. You can't use your auras, you can't use your added fire gem.
Right.
And so you have to look at other means of really scaling that damage.
So, and this is something that I kind of, was thinking at first, and, a lot of people are quick to, mention this, because one of the downsides on it is no elemental damage. And then a lot of people are just quick to say, hey, well, mobs have resistances. And I think that they don't have as many resists as people may think. And even when you consider resistances, the way additional damage works via, added fire and hatred, I think that actually tends to deal a lot more damage than, say, vulnerability. Because that's what a lot of people say. Oh, you should just use a blasphemy vulnerability setup. The only kind of thing about vulnerability that, not kind of thing, but the only thing about vulnerability that actually makes it, better is the fact that it double dips technically.
Right. On the damage over time components.
Right.
And that's something we also have to keep in mind is there are new ways to scale physical damage just in the last year that you couldn't really do it previously, like poison, for example, is a very, very effective way of scaling your physical damage. However, there are other benefits you get from scaling it via elemental damage that you don't get here. Like you, for example, can't use elemental nodes. You can't use physical added as an element, which now appears on more items because of prophecy. And it also means when you're choosing your supports, you have to look at things like sometimes like the stun gem, just because it does something, but it isn't elementally aligned.
Right.
So changing your gem choices. At this point, probably people are just using poison. But making you think about how you're scaling your physical attacker in different ways was actually one of the core ideas behind Starforge. Most physical builds up until sort of this patch had basically been scale your physical and then toss in your elemental auras and supports, and you'll basically get a multiplier on there. And resistances do factor in certain encounters, like boss fights, for example. Resistances can actually make quite a large difference, but broadly speaking, resistances they don't really come into play when you're clearing a map. You might, if you've got an Ellie Pen gem, you're going to get a significant amount more damage, but that's just because you are scaling down something that's already not like you can get and you can get into negative resistances and stuff like that if you really tried.
Right.
So and really our concern at this point, if you've beaten the Shaper and you've got this great sword, you have already shown that you can kill bosses. So resistances aren't really going to come into play there either. Right.
Yeah, and also it's, as mentioned earlier, it's important to have a reward for something like that. There's no outside incentive to kill any other than just killing Shaper then.
Right. And we want another one of the core ideas behind this weapon was we wanted something that looked crazy. Like you look at those numbers and you go, how can they allow this? It's an insane amount of physical damage. It's a very Timmy item. If you know the sort of Magic the Gathering psychographic profiles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a big numbers, big effect item. And we want something that, if you get it, you go, wow, like that's amazing. That's insane.
Right. Well, another thing too is some personalities, players were also, they said, this is best in slot, which is, as far as I'm concerned, I was incorrect. Because best in slot, I feel like that term is thrown around a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
Something might be best in slot in the sense that you benefit from every modifier on it, but not necessarily numbers wise, which is usually what best in slot refers to.
Yeah.
And but the only thing about that is, especially when you have in challenge leagues, that item, a well-rolled Starforge is going to be considerably stronger than a majority of items that are going to be generated in the league.
Mm-hmm.
I've only seen, I'm sure they happen more often. I don't really play Melee that many times, but I've only known a couple of players that I've played with that said, oh, I'm going to mirror the 700 DPS mace for my Ground Slam build. And that was when Ground Slam was a thing, the last time I saw that. So how does that work when you're looking at the potential power of an item in a challenge league, but how it actually compares to items in standard league where most players are actually playing?
Right. Yeah. It is something we have to take into consideration. If you're just looking purely at the physical DPS numbers, Starforge is fairly close to like a top end rare weapon that lasts like 20% DPS between like the absolute maximum and this is very hard to acquire.
Right. Makes me feel good you said 20% though, because that's exactly what I said in my video. I said,
yeah,
you get about 20% more damage within.
It's something around there. Yeah, I don't know the exact amount, but it's that gap is a very tough gap to close. But with a rare weapon, you have the versatility of you can use your auras, you can use your gems to scale your damage. If your resistances are fine, if your defenses are fine, you just slap on your offensive auras and you slap on your heralds and you're tearing through things. Starforge really does mean you have to look at different ways to scale your damage, and your aura choices are narrower. And also in party play, like this factors in quite a lot. If you've got your guardian buffing your party, you're missing out on quite a lot of that utility. So the high damage, it's very good, and the area of effect is very good, and the life is very good. But in reality, the amount of damage a player is doing is about the same as like a well-scaled disfavor.
Right.
And disfavor has never been like a problematic weapon
because of what it's gated behind.
Well, that, and because like a rare weapon does have this like flexibility of like you can get better damage on a rare weapon, and then you can scale it with elemental.
Gotcha. And disfavor also does kind of make you like prefer the non-elemental route too, doesn't it? A little bit. Well, maybe.
Yeah. The bleed is certainly help. You want high physical because of that bleed, but like you can slap on an added fire and you can slap on your auras and heralds, and you've now like doubled the damage you're doing in reality.
Right. So were there when you compare the Shaper rewards to Uber Zero rewards, was there anything that you guys had learned from the Uber Zero rewards that you applied to the Shaper rewards?
We sort of looked at Atziri as a whole. We know, like, for example, the Atziri Flask is very popular, and it's sort of, after people start clearing Atziri, those flasks start to trickle down quite quickly, and you have, like, people who are never going to face Atziri and have no interest in facing Atziri using Atziri's Promise. So we knew that, like, a generally powerful flask is something that players will use and enjoy and will, sort of get passed around. And we wanted something as the common reward, we wanted something that would be broadly powerful, which is why Dying Sun is sort of the most common item. It's something, even if you were after something different, you've got something you can sell off, or you've got something that,
right.
Almost any of your builds will be able to use some component of that flask.
Dying Sun is the most common one?
Yes. Probably should. I think it is. It's been a while since I looked at the drop table, but I believe that was the most common one. I'm not positive, so you probably shouldn't quote me on that one.
I will.
But if we're looking at like what the Atziri items taught us, we knew that a con flask is good. We knew a powerful weapon is good. We also knew that there are some dangers in having something that's very extreme. Like Atziri's acuities, for example.
Right.
Those ended up being sort of problematic. They overshadowed all of the other drops, and they made builds that should have been more vulnerable very close to immortal when they were first put out.
Right.
So we knew that there is an upper limit to the amount of power we can give out. I also, it's something to keep in mind that a boss like the Shaper ends up being one of the goals for most players indefinitely.
You mean as in it's something that people just always want to do?
Well, there's that, but also like when we added Act 4, Zeri was still the Uber Zeri was still like the pinnacle piece of content.
Right.
Right. And she was added like a year prior to that. So, you know, a year from now, it's very likely that the Shaper is still going to be the pinnacle piece of content that people farm at the end of the league, or up there with Uber Zeri. So, ensuring that like those rewards would stay interesting for whatever state the game is a year or 2 years, 3 years from now. Ensuring that those rewards, like as we add new skills, those rewards still hold some interest and still allow you to do crazy things was important. So, like, if we look at, for example, Shaper's Touch, I know people don't love the Shaper's Touch.
I like those gloves.
I'm glad to hear it, but
I play Iron Commander and Siege Ballista, though, so I mean...
Right. I mean, that's actually one of the builds we looked at when designing these gloves. I wanted something that... I mean, it was maybe a mistake in retrospect to put something that was sort of designed to help niche builds as sort of an end game content reward. But the goal there was this will unlock things now and in the future.
Right.
Because you can scale one attribute and get half the benefit of another. And that means that your attribute scaling builds, your Whispering Ices, which probably get the worst utilization of the gloves. But like your Whispering Ices, your Iron Commanders, your Pillar of the Cage Gods, they all will have some interesting benefit now for scaling their core attribute.
Right. Well, the way I see Shaper's Touch is like they're really only like there's not too many reasons to ever scale dexterity in the game right now. I mean, even for Pillar of the Cage God, what does dexterity give you? Attack speed for 20?
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of like I think most of the Pillar of the Cage God builds are more reliant, or they're more focusing on their intelligence and their strength because it's about AoE.
Right.
So when I look at Shaper's Touch, since there aren't too many reasons to actually scale dexterity, it's a little like I almost feel like the dex to life ratio on that could have been slightly more generous, because there aren't like I said, there just aren't many builds that where you think like, oh well, let me get another 200 dexterity, because you could already get gloves with strength on them with a tier 1 life roll, and that's already putting you in that 120 life range. So
yep. But we need to keep in mind again that like these are items that will outlive the current league, right? They will outlive many leagues. We need to, and we'll be adding skills and other items, and it's almost certain, like with the way we add items and to these sorts of like skill and item designs, we'll almost certainly do more dex scaled items and dex scaled builds and in scale items and in scaled builds, and we'll be looking at things to even synergize with existing items. Oftentimes, you know, like we look at when Whispering Ice was being designed, we looked at all of the sources of increased intelligence and made sure that there was sort of enough to make that build powerful. You know, I think it was around that time that we also put out Black Sun's Crest, which scales all of your attributes to some extent. Or maybe it's a little bit after that, but we keep in mind, like, all right, we want well, whispering, you want to scale int. Are there enough sources of int? Are there too many sources of int? What do we need? Do we need to nerf something? Do we need to buff something? Do we need to add more sources in? We initially had a jewel that gave you some intelligence per unallocated node in the passive tree.
Wisdom of the path not taken. I love that
Exactly.
jewel. I miss it.
Yeah, it's just one of our programmers, Mark, who often posts. That's his sort of all-time favorite jewel flavor-wise. But that ended up being like crazy powerful with Whispering Eye.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to prevent that. And I every so often I look at the tree and go, I wonder if there's anything we can do with unallocated nodes. But giving a reward for not taking something ends up being kind of hard to balance.
Right.
Incentivizing not doing something is dangerous. But so, like, again, looking at these the Shaper's Touch gloves, we look at these and, I mean, these gloves are gonna be around forever, right?
Yeah.
And so, as more and more uses for attributes trickle through, whether that's via supporter uniques or GGG uniques or skills, the usage of these gloves can only really grow, you know? Yeah. So they're quite niche right now, and even the best case right now is kind of, on par at best with, some very good rare gloves. The meta is a lot shorter than the lifespan of these gloves. So I think it was probably the wrong place for a fairly niche item to appear. Right. But I think that it's an item that will see use in the future.
Don't get me wrong. I like them. I actually kind of think they're okay where they are right now. I just, when I look at the Shaper uniques, we have Dying Sun, Shaper's Touch, Starforge, and when we have Voidwalker too. When I think about all those uniques, there's the only one that I feel like is a little too niche, is what you're saying with Voidwalkers. Because those they seem like they're either missing life or they're missing ES, and I feel like there's potential there. I don't know. What was your thought process on those?
We actually the Voidwalker boots are very powerful. Our QA team really thought they were kind of pushed as far as the power goes. They are missing like life. They've got a little bit of energy shield, but not exactly a huge amount, right? But boots in general don't get huge defenses. But they have like projectile avoidance, which doesn't sound like a very important mod, but in reality, if you're rushing through a map, the things that are going to most likely hurt you are the things that are flying around.
So you think they're better defensively than offensively?
No, I think they're also kind of ridiculous offensively because you kill something, you gain phasing, and now all of your projectiles have Pierce. That means you're saving a support gem if you're running like Spark or Vol Fireball, for example, is a popular skill at the moment. Right. You kill something, and now all of your projectiles just continue. That's quite, and you're running around uninterrupted. You're running through enemies. This is as far as like the clear speed meta that people love goes. This is very well suited to that because you now get to kill uninterrupted, and your projectiles get to kill uninterrupted.
So is it a little surprising to you that they're kind of like the most like frowned upon unique out of the Shaper?
It actually is, yeah. I think that they are being undervalued, personally. But I think people will find more and more interesting ways to use them as time goes by, just like the gloves. These are less. So if we're looking at like Starforge as a big flashy Timmy item with huge numbers and a big effect, these are probably closer to like Spike or Johnny items. Like Johnny likes to do quirky things, and Spike cares about power. This is an avenue where you can do a quirky thing and it's actually quite powerful.
Right. Well, because Pierce utility is really, really good, especially when you pair it with things like like drill neck, for example.
Yep.
So you may be losing, a 20% more multiplier on a pierced gem, but that is a gem that you could do something else with, like you said.
Right. And on top of that, it synergizes very well with the Raider, and the Raider is not super popular at the moment.
Right.
So I think that also harms the outlook of that item. But that doesn't necessarily indicate the power.
I think as someone who has played a Raider, the only thing I hated about Raider was whenever I lost my frenzy charges and I had to backtrack, it felt really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was all of a sudden I went from being like a sports car to just a station wagon. But I mean, I liked the flavor of Voidwalker. I thought they were really cool. I think the art on them is amazing. I mean, all the 3D art for the items are really good.
Our artists did a phenomenal job. We have, I am daily amazed by the sort of stuff they come up with. Whenever I request art for items, or whenever some new concept art's coming through, I just it sort of blows my mind how talented they are.
Right. So all right. We talked about Shaper's Touch and Starforge and Voidwalker. We kind of touched on Dying Sun, but I feel like that is the item that is going, as you said, that's going to have the item with the longest like shelf life. It's going to expand or extend across multiple metas. That wasn't difficult to really push through, because I feel like a lot of people, even myself included, I remember a long time ago, I thought to myself, man, I want to design a unique, and I want to put AoE on it.
Right.
So how did that work for the design?
There was some contention about it. Flasks are tough items to design as uniques, because flasks are the only items that don't have a rarity. So when you're looking at designing a unique flask, you've got like magics which have 2 mods, and you're usually looking at something that dispels bleeding, or whatever status ailment you're actually worried about. And there's not really a middle ground between that and a unique. So uniques have to basically, for a unique to be desirable, it sort of has to be in many ways a direct upgrade. Because like I said, there's no rare.
Mm-hmm.
And to make something that's on the same level as a magic is not going to be desirable enough, because magic flasks are actually really powerful.
Right.
So when we're making unique flasks, we're sort of more looking at what you're missing out on. The more unique flasks a player is using, the more vulnerable but they become to things like freeze and shock and ignite and bleed. And, the less utility flasks they're able to use. So, and again, like I said, we wanted something that was going to be generally powerful as one of the more common rewards. Because it feels very bad if you've been playing for 2 months, you've been leveling up your character, you've been getting ready for your Shaper fight, you've finally got your 4 fragments, you've been watching the fight on YouTube, you've practiced with friends, you finally beat them, and you get something you can't use.
Right.
So,
although there aren't too many unique flasks in the game that most builds can't use.
Right. Which is why Flask was one of the choices for Shaper Reward. Flasks can be sort of generally powerful.
Right.
And for quite a while, we had very few unique flasks, especially about a year ago. There's basically like the It's 3 Flask, Rumi's Concoction, and then a couple of more niche. You had like Dodri's, you had Divination Distillate. Yeah, Taste of Hate was. I think we introduced it about a year ago, maybe a little more than that. So yeah, Taste of Hate was one of the first in the new wave of powerful flasks. The more powerful flasks we add, the more competition there is in the flask slot, and the more you push out things that are basically like useful on a basic level, like life flasks, which you then start to miss, right? If you're playing a life build and you don't have your life flask, you notice it. If you don't, you see things, you know. So that's something we have to keep in mind when we're designing flasks. Is we don't want them to be. We don't want to just continue to make like incredibly powerful flasks. There's always a correct answer for the two powerful uniques you have, but we want there to be some variety in your choices. We don't want everybody just using Taste of Hate and Series Promise or Remy's Concoction, you know. So this is, and flasks are also usually defensively oriented, but this is, you know, starkly offensively oriented. It's basically going to help you clear maps, but it's not necessarily going to help you against bosses, which is when flasks actually matter.
Right. I think the big asterisk here with this is also Pathfinder.
Yes, well, yeah, Pathfinder is very, very powerful, but it's also a hard class to play properly. A new player would very much struggle playing a Pathfinder. So there's a higher skill cap there, and we're also keeping an eye on basically all of the ascendancies. We made tweaks during the last patch. We made tweaks in the patch before that, and you know, tweaks are going to be ongoing indefinitely, just as we tweak skills and we tweak the passive tree and stuff. So the Pathfinder is really, really strong. In part due to the power of flasks, but in part just due to the nature of the Pathfinder.
Yeah, I mean, I personally haven't played a Pathfinder build, but, you know, as you were saying, you know, as you introduce more unique flasks and you take more flask slots, then there's also the whole thing about, well, CI. I mean, CI Pathfinder is a big thing in the meta right now, and I know there's a lot of people really, really on GGG about that. And, you know, there's that post just yesterday on Reddit that someone just titled, I'm at 15,000 energy shield. How does life compete with this? So, yeah,
energy shield is in a good spot, but probably too good of a spot. There's a bunch of different reasons for that. Essence is a big one.
Yeah,
it's a lot easier to get high energy shield items now than it was, you know, last league or the league before that. But it's the meta is quite fickle. You know, 6 months ago, people were complaining that CI was too hard to build for. So I'd say right now, Energy Shield is looking very, very strong.
Right. Well, what you just said, you just mentioned that, you know, the essences, it's just really all it's doing is just making that ES gear more available. Because it's actually kind of been like this for a long time. I mean, I've played multiple CI builds where I was in that 12 to 13k range pretty easily. But, you know...
It takes a while to get the items together for that.
Right.
Like, that's probably 2 months into the league or a month and a half into the league.
Right.
That's when you're looking at going CI. Because now there's the influx of items available to sort of build that character. But, Essence has really sped that up. So that's just something we have to look at.
Right.
Really.
It almost made it like a non-choice. Like, oh, I could get 10k ES by the end of the first week, or I could have 6k life.
Yep.
What's the bigger threat?
It's true. There's some stuff around there. But that's sort of our balance team will probably be looking at.
Right.
Yes.
So before I ask this next question, there's actually one item that if I could get your thoughts on it, and no one probably is going to want me to ask about this item, but Incandescent Heart. I'm actually I'm a little surprised that more people don't try to use it, because it has such a huge like defensive boon on it.
Yep.
And we have plenty of CI builds using things like Vol's Protector. So if you're able to achieve 12k ES with a CI build with a Vol's Protector, you know, I don't understand why Incandescent Heart is kind of avoided. You know?
Oftentimes there are very, very strong items that get ignored because no one's really trying them. There are builds that have sprung up in the past that like ended up being sort of ridiculously strong but nothing really changed to make them ridiculously strong.
Right.
It's just nobody had tried them yet, or they had forgotten that these items exist. No one's, people focus on what their friends are doing, what the streamers are doing. The meta really sort of defines itself. Once someone says this is really strong, people tend to gravitate to that and do variations of that one thing. And that for that reason, we have a lot of sleeper items that people sort of ignore or think are not strong enough or underpowered, but are really just fine, or even sometimes too strong. Right. I still think, for example, this is probably people are gonna argue with me about this, but Mind Over Matter and Cloak of Defiance, that mechanic is still extremely powerful if you play it with mana, and people just don't do that.
Right. Well, I think that is actually kind of about my next question, because although I recognize that it could still be good, I think one problem with it is the fact of the way Mind Over Matter works. It says mana is taken before life, and so a lot of builds that are generally in that region of the tree are going to be hybrid, so it doesn't take mana before ES, right?
Right.
So it's essentially it's almost as if it's a buffer behind your ES.
Yep.
But then you still get the benefit of it affecting chaos hits, not degen. But yeah, because the other thing I was going to ask was specifically, especially, I'm sure that you heard, I can't remember what podcast this was on. I think it was on Hedgies and Latino Bros. But when they had Chris on, he specifically had mentioned that, there were talks around the office that Calm's Heart was being considered to go back to previous health amounts, or just higher than 500. And my question is, like, are there any rebalances coming up where specifically you guys are considering going back to legacy versions? Cloak of Defiance is one of those items.
I don't know if there are any specific if we're talking about going back to legacy versions for any specifically, but we are doing right now, we've got more designers than we've ever had before, and so we're using some of the extra designer time to review all of the unique items, and see if are these still suitable for the current state of the game. If not, what can we do? Some of them are too strong, some of them are too weak. It's still important that, for example, we have different levels of power across uniques. If they were all, approximately similar in terms of power, then, your ability to make a decision becomes sort of irrelevant. And it also means you, as a long-term player or a skilled player, being able to assess the power level of items becomes harmed. Part of the enjoyment players get from a game like Path of Exile is they build a knowledge, and then they can use that knowledge. And so we need to keep in mind, part of the fun is knowing what's good. And that means that not everything can be good, or not everything can be as good as, a Calm's Heart legacy, Right. So I don't know, to answer your question, I can't think of any specific legacy reversals, but no hard decisions have been made on any of these things yet. I know we've got a list internally of uniques that we want to look at, and I don't know exactly when changes will be made, because we're also working on huge amounts of future content.
Right, as you guys do.
Yes. So oftentimes we get a lot more value out of new content than we do changing old content, which I know it can be frustrating to hear.
Yeah.
But when you're looking to, excite players, it's a lot easier to say, we've added all these new maps and new endgame content than it is to say we've tweaked, 40 uniques.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because that's almost kind of playing off of, because even if you do tweak Mind Over Matter or Cloak of Defiance right now, as you said, that you still think it's incredibly powerful, but the meta would disagree. I think people would say, well, no, even if you bumped Mind Over Matter or Cloak of Defiance back up to its original legacy percentage of 40%, most people would probably still not be using a mana-based Mind Over Matter character. I mean, I've heard a couple of people say that it's still possible. Not possible, but just a thing. And I even, admittedly, I think it's still something that you could do. My only beef with it is the fact that it doesn't take mana before ES. And as I mentioned, that area is a little more prone to hybrid builds.
Yep.
So...
Yep, that is one of the main reasons that I think it's less popular now. But again, like Mind Over Matter, when you go ES and ES then protects your mana if you go Eldritch Battery. So it is sort of internally consistent, and that seems to. I mean, there was a period after we changed how Mind Over Matter worked where everyone was going life, and then Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter.
Right.
And it was really good.
Yeah. Well, another thing too is almost seemed like with the power of curses, right?
Yep.
Now that we have Blasphemy, you have even more things to reserve on mana. So when we're talking about like a Mind Over Matter build now, like in the traditional sense of taking damage from your mana, you have more and more reason to reserve nearly as much of your mana as possible. Like like an item that I love. And I have a +1. I Valorbed a Infernal Mantle that dropped, but I just Valorbed it because they're not really worth anything right now, the league, and I got +1 on it, +1 skill gems, and I've been sitting there thinking about like ways I could use it because I could obviously 5 or 6 link it with a Varichi recipe while expensive. Then I have to look at the downside. 100% increased spell damage taken is pretty substantial. So it's like, oh well, I don't want to reserve my mana. Then it makes makes sense to do a Mind Over Matter build with something like that. But then I lose the benefit of either Blasphemy or Auras.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is another. There are a few aspects that have sort of made Mind Over Matter harder and harder to justify. Yeah. But ultimately, like when you. Its power level has only really changed relatively to new aspects in the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to run an old Mind Over Matter on mana build, you'd still it doesn't function any differently to the way it did 2 years ago.
Right.
And so yeah, I mean this is also something we're looking at. Curses and auras and mana reservation. This is all it's a big juggling act, and we're spinning a lot of plates. Mixed metaphors here.
Right. There's a lot of moving parts that, and as new content is added and as new skills and new mechanics are added, it gets even more difficult. Like even, I remember when the announcement of jewels were coming out, and we had jewels that would, affect you would have the radius of the jewels. My first thought of that was like, wow, that almost locks the passive tree like in a certain shape for a really long time. And I'd imagine that is something that, as you guys add more mechanics, that makes it harder because we have all these channeling skills coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now, you can't necessarily just be like, oh well, let's throw a trap or a channeling cluster in right here on the passive tree, because all of a sudden that may have some, consequences you guys don't want with jewels.
Yeah, we actually had something a couple patches ago. I think we were adding in art somewhere on the passive tree, or there was something. When our creative director Eric wanted to do something to sort of make the passive tree look aesthetically more pleasing.
Is it when it nudged nullification?
It might have been. There was basically what ended up happening is the passive tree was the space between all of the nodes was expanded,
right?
Which is problematic,
right?
And so we had to sort of undo that.
I do remember a time when, because if you use Intuitive Leap, the unique gem that lets you jump without allocating points, over in the Shadow region, you could grab the Power Charge, the Frenzy Charge, and Nullification. I'm actually using that on my build right now, but there was a little bit, which is probably what you're referring to, where also I think it was right when Ascendancy got released, it just nudged it just out of range.
Yeah.
And although there may have been other examples of that too, but that's something that, like I said, when you're adding all this new content, that was when I saw that, I was like, oh man, now the passive tree is going to change for a long time. And I'm
Right.
dying for a passive tree, like just completely just huge scramble of the passive tree.
Yeah, it's a big job now. I mean, it's always a big job, even when we're doing just like the shadow area, for example. Whenever we're doing like sort of a localized area reshuffle, especially for like starting areas, it takes a long time, because you have to not just factor in like what an experienced player wants, but the new player experience as well. I recently got my dad to start playing Path of Exile.
Interesting.
And his passive tree is all over the place. He's grabbing strength nodes off to the side of the starting area just because they're nearby and he thinks maybe they'll be useful. Like,
right.
A new player experience is so far from an expert player's experience that designing the starting area of a class is one of the most important and really one of the slowest things a game designer has to do. It takes. I remember it took like a month or something like that to redo the shadow area.
Yeah.
It takes a very, very long time to get that as close to right as we can possibly get. There's never going to be like a perfect answer, especially in a game that is alive and changes every 3 months. But yeah, so jewels have made that ability to tweak stuff more difficult, but we can also change the location of the jewel socket. And we're keenly aware that there are certain jewels and certain clusters and certain combinations that players love and use regularly.
Right.
And we're also sort of keeping an eye out for new opportunities to make those sorts of situations where we know, do we want to add a new jewel that does some crazy thing on the tree? But yeah, it's a tough process.
Yeah.
And jewels have made it tougher.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for chatting with me. I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
Yeah, I should get to work. I've been doing this from home.
Okay, cool. Wait, are you in San Francisco?
No.
Oh.
I only live like 20 minutes from the offices.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's why I was confused. I was like,
I used to live in San Francisco.
Gotcha. All right. Well, do you want to plug anything? I mean, since you're a front seat gamer, dumb me. I've listened to that so many times. I didn't even know that. I didn't even connect those dots.
You're more than welcome to pimp out that podcast. Blake and Severnerd, I'm sure, would also really appreciate it.
Yeah, if you guys haven't listened to it, you should check it out. It's really good. I really enjoy it, especially when it's not especially, but it's also nice that you guys don't just talk about Path of Exile.
Yeah, in fact, we try to avoid just talking about Path of Exile. We as gamers love games. We love working on Path of Exile. We love Path of Exile, but we broadly love games, so we love to talk about them.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, man, and I'll talk to you later.
Cool. No worries. Yep.
Please don't forget to share this video if you liked it. If you have any comments or feedback for me, constructive criticisms, leave it in the comments below or send me a message. I'll read those as well. Follow me on Twitter. Twitter is @wabacha. And thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.